I'm going to welcome to the stage Abel, the star of the day, to talk about neurodiversity. So, clap your hands.
Now, I'm not saying that neurodivergent people are the drugs of the workplace, but if you were to take us out of the equation, I think things would be a lot less interesting. In general, I feel really bad for neurotypical people. Can you hear me with the, I think I could put this in my mouth like that. I feel really bad for neurotypical people, and it's not because they can't just walk into a room and then forget why they're there, or spend their entire paycheck on a hobby to completely forget about it a week later. But it's because they got the worst name, typical. Like, unless you're at the doctor and you're hearing the results of some test, most of us don't want to be told we're typical. Meanwhile, us divergent folk, we got the cool title. We're divergent. There's literally a best-selling book series and a blockbuster film trilogy called Divergent, where divergent people save the world. And but the truth is that my whole life I have felt like I was in a video game and I was surrounded by NPCs. So NPCs are non-playable characters, they're like the characters from the video game. And I thought I was alone, but then I found out that tons of neurodivergent people all over the world use that exact same metaphor, so there is something to what that feels like. And I just have all these memories of, watching a group of people sitting around a table, drinking coffee and talking, and I'm just like, they look happy. They're enjoying this? And every now and again, I would try to jump in and join the conversation, and what happens? Just blank stares. And it felt like their programming didn't understand my input, and so the computer didn't know how to respond to me. But every now and again, you meet somebody, and instantly it's like, oh my God, I found another human in this video game. Finally, there's someone out there. Well, years later, I have learned two things. The first thing is, those blank stares I got were because I had just traumatized a group of strangers by trapping them into a TED Talk they did not sign up for about the time my ex-boyfriend tried to give me HIV, and they were just talking about funny dating stories. And the second thing is that it's a known thing that neurodivergent people, we are naturally drawn to one another. This is actually studied in psychology. And psychologists say it's because we can understand each other better and communicate. But I think we all know the real reason is that we're the only ones who can tolerate each other. And I mean, there are a lot of traits that us spicy folk tend to share. And my favorite one is something called justice sensitivity, which means that we are hyper-fixated on fairness and equality. Sorry, that's a symptom of something? I get diagnosed with that? During my autism screening, one of the questions is, do you struggle with authority? And at first I was like, no, I'm a pacifist, I don't start fights. I'm super chill. And then I thought about it and I was like, I have accidentally become the leader of 3 different workplace revolutions throughout my life. And every single job, at some point, my boss sits me down and is like, Abel, you really need to pick your battles. And I'm like, I didn't pick anything. This was assigned to me at birth. And honestly, that energy, that drive to fight for what's right, to be really passionate, to hyper-focus on things, to have visual thinking, to have 38 hobbies, only 2 of them you do at a time, that is a strength. Until it isn't. until your brain just shuts down. And it's because the other thing about neurodivergence that's not romanticized and is not in the memes is burnout. And it doesn't just mean I'm tired. It means that your body like forgets how to do things. And one of the first signs that this was happening to me was with eggs. Sounds kind of weird, but let me tell you about the time that I tried to make eggs. There were a lot of changes happening at work, and I was being pulled into a lot of projects, some of them for work, some of them were revolution-based. And in the morning, I walked into the kitchen, I took a full carton of eggs out of the fridge, walked over to the counter, took 2 eggs out, put them on the counter, took the carton with 10 eggs still inside, turned around, dropped it on the floor, and then just stepped on it. Eggs went everywhere. As if I was going to recycle it and it were empty. And I remember doing that, but I don't remember who was doing it. It's like all of these basic functions in my mind that are just kind of autopilot suddenly were misfiring and not working anymore. I was experiencing autistic burnout. And after several weeks of doctor's appointments and therapy sessions, I came out the other side with some new diagnoses and essentially having met myself for the first time. But there was this like slight anger in my heart. And I'm gonna be really American for just like one sentence. I have always been an extremely high achiever at work. And after this, I've come to see that a lot of the biggest achievements that I've had at work were due to my neurodivergence, from my different ways of thinking and such. And this anger in my heart was that while divergent strengths are praised and romanticized, even trendy, the world isn't designed for us. It's just a fact that neurodivergent people experience burnout and have a harder time at work compared to neurotypical people. And so I think that we really need to understand each other better so that we both can thrive and that you don't just benefit off of our kooky weirdness. So let's start this by looking at what are commonly kind of called like neurodivergent strengths, and then we'll compare them to neurotypical strengths. Now it's working again, okay. Autistic minds are known for being very good at detecting patterns and understanding complex systems relatively quickly. ADHD, autistic, and dyslexic minds tend to process information in what's called non-linear ways, which leads us to have these kind of unexpected connections and like fresh perspectives on old topics. Both ADHD and autistic minds are known for getting deeply immersed into things of interest or things that fascinate us for whatever reason. And so many of us have expertise, like rich expertise, in a number of random things, sometimes incredibly niche. Mine happens to be how vowels change over time in languages. And we tend to master new skills very quickly. Resilience. This one's super interesting to me. ADHD people are commonly seen to be very calm and clear thinking in an emergency. And there's a few different theories around this, but the one that makes sense to me is that it's thought that ADHD is caused by dopamine production being lower on a normal basis. So then when you go into an emergency for ADHD people, their dopamine becomes what neurotypical people have at a normal state. So the neurotypical people, their dopamine goes sky high, they're running all over the place. ADHD were like, oh, this is what it's like to be typical all of a sudden. And dyslexic people also, it's commonly known as for dyslexia that it's like you switch letters and numbers around. But what's really happening is that dyslexic people have something called visual thinking. And when it comes to an emergency, it's also seen that dyslexic people tend to be calm. And the thought is that because they can kind of see more of what's happening. my favorite, justice sensitivity. It's observed that autistic and ADHD people are less likely to engage in deception and more likely to act on principle. Elon Musk, who is diagnosed as autistic, is an obvious example that these are generalizations and they don't apply to everybody.
Right.
And then lastly, 3D or spatial thinking. So this is where dyslexia really shines. Most dyslexic people have above average spatial reasoning skills, and they have this ability to really visualize huge, complex things in their mind. It's almost like if it was like a 3D render and they were kind of moving it around. It is such a neurotypical thing to look at this list and be like, wow, those are superpowers. But I've watched neurotypical people accurately estimate how long it will take to do something, and like that to me is like the X-Men power. So let's look at what the typical superpowers are. And in reality, like 80 to 85% of the world is neurotypical, so like this list could just be like things that neurodivergents suck at. Consistency. I guess I feel so weird. Like it's typicals usually can just pace themselves. They can maintain a steady effort. They can stay reliable. Typicals usually don't stress about going into a social interaction. They just sort of seamlessly walk in with unspoken social rules, reading body language. And they often can pick up on like social expectations and norms just quickly and naturally without thinking. Typicals are also usually capable of handling a lot of projects in that they can easily keep sight on what the end goal is. There's far less of a risk that they're going to fall down some rabbit hole because they were working on one part and that became interesting, and then they're gone for 3 days learning about, the great vowel shift of English in the 1600s. Time perception. So typicals often just have this intuitive sense of time management, deadlines, and again, pacing. And they also have this like X-Men power to just know how long something will take. I'm famous for everything either being 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Like there's nothing shorter or longer than those. And detail awareness. This one's kind of a funny one because while neurodivergents are known for kind of seeing details other people don't see, typicals are known for seeing the details that are right there in front of us. So this is one area where when you have the two people combined, you see the whole picture. Cool. And we divergents, we have a tendency to reinvent the wheel for every single thing we do, whereas typicals tend to excel at seeing how the existing methods and the existing tools can be used to reach the same goal in the end. Now keep in mind, these are generalizations. Generalizations based in data and research, but nonetheless generalizations. I am not saying that, I'm not trying to imply, and I don't believe that like all divergent people have those things and typicals can't have them, or the other way around. I do think at this point though that it's pretty clear that our minds kind of complement each other, and by working together on creative ideas and innovation, we're going to get the best results. And there's buckets of examples of how this works. So, one would think that divergent people would be treated equally and that the system would work for us. However, we experience much higher rates of burnout, stress, and anxiety at work compared to typical people. And there's a lot of examples of this, but autistic burnout, this is a specific form of burnout with a whole body of research around it. And it's this loss of skills that really makes it stand out. Like, I've never had amnesia, but that's the best way I can describe it. Like, I forgot how to do things that are just basic. A matter of numbers, ADHD people burn out more often than people without ADHD. And most dyslexic people experience higher levels of stress at work. But when I found this study, my eyes kind of bugged out, because my whole life I've noticed that, well, ever since high school, I guess, when I started to get stressed, I've noticed that when I'm stressed, my dyslexia kind of like flares up, and I start to mix things around a lot more frequently and like stronger. But what is it? Like, what's happening in our workplaces that's causing us to have such a different and bad time? So let's look how workplaces are physically, digitally, and procedurally kind of designed against us. Open office plans are, like, I've never even been in a company that has offices anymore. I think this is like the default. These are high sensory, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of distractions. Hot desking, that's like when there's no assigned seats, you just kind of go in and sit wherever. This translates to no predictable personal space and constant change. And like, these two things are high stress for autistic people. And not having personal items can sound like really silly and kind of like, why do you want like your koosh ball and a picture of your cat? But these things do have strong effects on concentration and safety at work for us. And then in the digital world, requiring that the camera is always on for all video calls is increases social exhaustion by quite a lot for us, and for many people. Having rigid or strict software that's only like one way of doing it, that means only one way of thinking. Instead of like a consolidated, weekly newsletter or something like that, and having very clear channels and groups on Slack. There's people in TEDx right now that are probably laughing at me because I am like the group queen on Slack. Instead of having those, you have kind of mass chaos, which is annoying for everybody, but especially with ADHD people, it just leads to paralysis and not knowing where to go or what to do. I'm ahead of myself. So poor or inconsistent documentation can lead to confusion, and again, often it's called executive paralysis. And then procedurally, when you rely on consistency and quantity over creativity or quality of performance for performance reviews, it specifically puts ADHD people at a very strong disadvantage. Hierarchies in general are difficult, but when they're dense, for people on the spectrum, this becomes just impossible to navigate socially. When there's some sort of a reward program and you're evaluating based on these like uniform criteria, instead of allowing space for how unique contributions or contributions outside of your role, it harms us more. And not having like a feedback culture, or what's worse, having a fake feedback culture, this just translates to unresolved justice sensitivity issues and punishment for being honest. This is the one that I have been getting in trouble with my whole life, from school until now. So, I'm guessing that a lot, or even most of you are thinking that like, almost everything I just said applies to everybody. Mm-hmm. And you're not wrong. I mean, I think most people, or many people, don't like a lot of those things. But the point is that many of those are uniquely stronger for us, like with the personal items thing. Like leading up to my burnout, my company switched to hot desking and banned personal items. And people actually laughed at me at work when I complained that I couldn't have all my weird little toys around my desk. But it stressed me out every morning going into the office, so I ended up working from home more often. The good news is that many of these things are not hard to change. And so after I recovered and I got back to work, I was able to make a lot of these changes, and it felt great. Like, things were working. It was wonderful. But then the universe saw this and was like, I thought we were making that guy's life a living hell. What's happening here? Let's fix that. So the scale up that I was at decided to scale down instead of up, and half the company was laid off, including my whole team. So right as I got good to go with how to work, I'd start over again, and now I'm applying for jobs for the first time in my life, essentially. And I had, like, all of my job switches have always been through networking or headhunters, so like, I'm like 39 years old and I'm writing my first CV. It was wild. And also, learning to do this as a neurodivergent person was a whole different bucket of stuff. So, started at the start, writing a CV. Turns out this is not easy for us. Keep your eye on the barometer over here. The first roadblock is that it's very common for neurodivergent people to have non-linear education paths and non-linear work paths. So for me, I actually skipped my last year of high school and started university early. I studied for 9 years straight, full-time, at 3 different universities on 3 different continents, and then I just dropped out. So I'm like the world's most educated person that does not even have a high school diploma. And then I worked for 16 years in 3 different industries with nothing in common and many different roles. On top of that, I have been a front-end developer and designer since I was like 12, and I sometimes do that on the side for some money. So who and what the hell am I on a CV? Like, I can't give them a book. Like, what do I do with this? And that kind of leads to this jack-of-all-trades perception. And the issue with the jack-of-all-trades perception is not that it makes it hard, it does make it hard to write a CV, but it makes it like impossible to find a job ad or a job role where if I hand you my CV, it makes any sense why I have just done that. So what we end up doing is making 40,000 versions of our CVs to sort of like masquerade as like a linear person or something. So once I got through that part and I had 12 versions of my CV all of a sudden, now I'm applying for jobs. More roadblocks. Many neurodivergent people really struggle to sell themselves. And personally, I kind of think this goes back to that like superpowers thing. Like, when we look at that list of like visual thinking and stuff, it's like we don't think those are special. Like, that's literally the only way I know how to do things. So it doesn't occur to me to tell people that about myself. There's a lot of studies around this, like the 2022 report from the Integrate Autism Employment Advisors, is so hard to say, found that most autistic people downplay and understate their abilities in their CVs and in their job applications. And then we have these like one-size-fits-all recruitment processes that are very rigid, and they don't accommodate for different types of communication or different types of thinking. Many divergent people struggle with vague questions and hypotheticals, and my personal like death allergy is small talk. Like, I just shut down. And out of the 78 applications I sent in, I did get 2 interviews, but one I sort of bombed, one I really bombed, and for very common reasons. First is blunt honesty. We really struggle with playing the game where, you know, you sugarcoat your weaknesses and like, oh, I'm so excited to work at this company and all that kind of stuff. It's like, we're really bad at that. And sometimes we can be just very honest, which comes off as kind of rude or just off-putting. And then the final roadblock that completely filled my barometer here is that we struggle with playing the game. We struggle with oversharing. And that can be just like not giving a very short answer, or it can be, like in my case, often just giving way too much personal information when they've asked you a very basic question. And this freaks people out. The blank stares from earlier. So, I mean, I think like a lot of the things I've been saying so far, these are generalizations and they apply to a lot of different people, not just Divergent. And if we could change them, it would really benefit a lot of people. And I also think that, like with the workplace stuff, a lot of those things aren't hard to change. And it's very infuriating to me that like our special powers are romanticized and like, you know, so trendy, but at the same time, like the system is literally designed against us. There was a report from the Harvard Business Review that found that 78% of companies that use those personality tests screen out neurodivergent people unintentionally. So, I started out the year feeling confident, but knowing that it wasn't going to be easy. And then after 8 months of just applying every day to things that I was super qualified for and only getting 2 interviews, it happened again. I crashed. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I couldn't concentrate, like it was hard to just read again. And I just felt like a useless idiot liar. Like someone from RBS for Medellin said, I have no education. I'm like, I took every single class at the University of Hawaii's linguistics department. Like, I have a lot of education. A friend sat down with me, and she went through some of my cover letters and some of my many different CVs, and she pointed out to me that none of those was me. I had reverted back to like my pre-diagnosis, pre-burnout self. And I had created a series of masks, and I was trying to like creep into these companies. And she asked me, why would I want to work at a company that was treating me that way? Like, how could I thrive at a place like that? So she said, be yourself so that people looking for you can find you. And this is one of these internet quotes that like 4,000 people take credit for, so I didn't even bother putting down a source for it. But when she said that, like I was just shook. That was the reminder I needed. No more masking, no more playing games. Like, I'm just gonna let my freak flag fly and go for it. But what does that mean, right? So first is I owned my jack of all trades, master of many mentality. Many of you probably know this, but the full quote of that phrase is, a jack of all trades, master of none, is often better than a master of one. So it was actually saying that having a lot of specialties is a good thing, but then thanks to capitalism and neoliberalism, the bottom part got cut off, and now we use it as an insult for someone who has a lot of talents. So no, I am not an unfocused jack of all trades. I am a modern day Renaissance man who is trapped in capitalism. I asked neurotypical people that I've worked with to look at my CV and tell me, like, what's missing from here? And I found a lot of things that people think that I'm really good at that I had no idea were even skills that they're like, yeah, dude, like, come on. If I saw a job ad that required a personality test, it was an instant click, moving on, not trying that thing. And when it came to cover letters and interviews, I was just a monster. I did not hold anything back. Whatever came here came out. And it was interesting. Yes, this did limit the job ads I was able to apply for. I was still getting rejections, but like within a month of making that change, I was invited to join the TEDx Gothenburg team, and many of them are here today. I started my own company, and I landed a freelance gig at a company that I genuinely admire, and they appreciate and respect me so much. So sometimes it pays just to be a weirdo, because then you're gonna find your weird home to be in. So listen, we need each other. I'll let you decide who's divergent and who's... A 2017 study in the Harvard Business Review found that cognitively diverse teams solved problems 30% faster compared to the teams that were only typical or only divergent. NASA has been known for years for specifically combining like visionary engineers with structured engineers, which you know what that's code for. And what they found is that leads to both innovation and safety. IDEO is this famous design agency, and I guarantee you there's at least one thing in your house right now that they've created. They're just fantastic. And their operating model for decades has been to specifically make teams that merge typical and divergent people in one team, because they find that they don't just get innovative ideas, they get things that are marketable, and what's the other word I'm trying to think of? Practical. And EY, the consultancy firm, they did their own research and found that when people have both dyslexia and autism, they are somehow a lot better at solving cybersecurity issues. So they have a program at EY where you can voluntarily say you have both of those and ask to be put onto cybersecurity projects with the other team. So why does this work, right? Basically, we need, hello, yeah. We need detail-oriented minds sitting beside big picture thinkers. There's a lot of famous artist duos like the Eames that are this way. We need risk management sitting beside risk-taking. This is the most common pair you find in the tech startup world. The whole Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak thing is a very classic example, and the BlackBerry dudes. We need stability and chaos side by side. Creativity dies when things are structured. Rewind. Creativity thrives in structured chaos. If things are too structured, it completely dies, and if things are too chaotic, it becomes too chaotic. Pixar is a really good example of this. They have one team called the Brain Trust, and then they have their tech production team, and they sit side by side, and the Brain Trust people are told to go crazy and just do whatever you want, and then the tech production people have to catch it and figure out what to do with it. And there's the story, the alleged story behind that is that the first Toy Story was about to be canceled. And then this tech production team kind of took over and fixed a bunch of things, and then they made a genre-defining film, and ever since then, that's how Pixar creates their movies. We need translators. A lot of us divergent people don't know how to use only a few words, and many of us just have trouble speaking in general. And so when you have a partner or a team that kind of gets to know you and understands you, they can become the speaker. There's a really famous story about AC versus DC, like electricity. You had Edison in the US doing DC, and then you had Tesla and Westinghouse in the UK doing AC. Tesla invented this, and he's super dyslexic, by the way, or was. But he had trouble kind of explaining it and getting it out there. And Westinghouse was an engineer, but also a businessman, and so he came in, and through the two of them together, they were able to spread the idea. So I've really only ever dated divergent people. And it wasn't anything intentional, it just sort of happened that way. And let me tell you, when two divergent people fall in love, it is a beautiful thing, and it is a chaotic thing. It's like this 4-year hyperfixation on each other that either ends in you forgetting each other or this explosive fireball of a breakup. And I just thought that's how love works. Love is two comets just slamming into each other with no brakes and full speed. And then I met my husband. And for the first few years, I remember just kind of sitting in the living room and staring at him. I'm like, who is this strange man in this room right now? Who is this NPC that's snuck into my personal space? And yes, it's because he is violently neurotypical. I like going to Burning Man, and he likes going to Big Macs, the hardware store. I want to travel the world, and he wants to go to Big Macs, the hardware store. And at first, it felt so weird, but then we figured out this really nice thing, and it's that we get to see a different world through each other. And 11 years later, our apartment is filled with all kinds of art that we've made together. And by together, I mean that I point and I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if this thing existed? And I explain everything, and then he goes to Big Mox. A week later, we have a 2-meter tall stuffed bear with its arms out standing behind our couch. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that when divergent and typical minds work together, we can make some weird-ass great stuff together. Good morning.
Okay, we already have one